Hello, everybody, and welcome back, or welcome if you are new here to my podcast, Reading and Weeping. My name is Julia, and I am your host, and in this podcast, we talk about all things books, all things reading, so I am very excited to have you join me for today's episode, because it is going to be a good one. So as I am recording this, we are about 10 days into the new year, 10 days into 2023. So happy new year, everybody. But this is around the time where a lot of people are starting to make New Year's resolutions about, whatever it is that they want to accomplish in their life over the next year. And I think the appeal of the New Year's resolution is that it's a new year, it's a fresh start. I can shed whatever I didn't like about myself over the past year and start new. It's only going to be uphill from here. But I know for me, at least when I try and set those goals for myself, I end up always falling short. Pretty much every single time I end up falling short, and I know that a lot of people do as well. Which is why the New Year's resolution as a concept is often not foolproof. But I thought to myself, this year I am actually going to do it. I actually want to turn my life around in several ways, but I don't really have the tools to do it. So I did something that I never, ever thought that I would do, and that is employ the advice of a self-help book. I do not read self-help books very often. And the one that I am going to be talking about today, I actually didn't finish, but I'm still very, very excited to talk about it because it's a lot different from what I expected the typical self-help book to tell me. So without further ado, let's get into it. I've always had a pretty cynical outlook on self-help books in general. I feel like they're always written in this condescending tone with the author saying things to you like, you're probably here because you hate yourself. Well, if you want to get your shit together, if you want to turn your life around, then you need to follow my exact steps. Otherwise, you're going to be a sad, pathetic loser for all of eternity. And they act like everything that they say is gospel. Like you are so lucky to hear my knowledge and what it is that I have to say. And I wrote it all down in a book that only costs $15. Run, don't walk to buy it. And then you realize that all of these people are just saying the same shit in a different way. And once you realize that, you kind of start to just be like, all right, well, what is all of this really for? Are you actually here to give me advice, or do you just want to make a quick buck? And it's not like this just happens in the literary space. I think it happens just as much, if not more so, on social media. I mean, we've all seen those motivational speeches that are like set to this like sad but hopeful sounding stock music. And the person talking is always like promising the world if you just work hard and follow your dreams. And it's just so exhausting to hear. But it's not only in that format. There was also a pretty big trend. I think it was either last year or in 2021. And it was mostly on TikTok. It was a series of videos that people would post that was titled, "How to Become That Girl," quote unquote. And the typical morning of that girl usually consisted of waking up at 4:30 in the morning and drinking lemon water, then putting on a matching Fabletics workout set and going to the gym, but only walking on the Stairmaster for an hour, coming home and making yourself a matcha latte and writing in your color-coded planner, then taking a shower with like a 10-step skincare routine and drying your hair with a Dyson Airwrap before you get to your work-from-home job in your $5,000 per month New York City skyscraper apartment. Now you might be thinking to yourself, Julia, why do you have so much disdain for this lifestyle? These people didn't do anything to hurt you. My answer to that would be, I do not have disdain for this lifestyle, and you're right. These people have done nothing to me. I'm not trying to make fun of them. But what I want to prove is that this lifestyle is not realistic for everybody. And to put these kind of videos out to imply that if you don't do these exact things, then sorry, you're not that girl. You are not a bad bitch that people want to emulate. You are just another average person, and you're not living up to your full potential like these other girls who are doing the most before the day even starts. And I feel like this is the exact kind of persona that a self-help book wants to turn you into, that a self-help book promises to turn you into. And it does that by comparing the reader to this imaginary ideal of the person that they could be, but are not even close to becoming, and by amplifying and capitalizing off of the shame that the reader and that all people feel every single day. So needless to say, I am not really a fan of self-help books at all. I'm mostly just not a fan of people giving me unsolicited advice, because at the end of the day, we're all doing our best trying to go through life. Let me make the mistakes that I need to make, and I'll learn from them and go on my way. You know what I mean? I don't really need this. This topic, funny enough, is actually the complete opposite of everything that I stand for when it comes to reading. I read to be entertained, and I read for escapism. I love diving into somebody else's world so I don't have to think about mine for a little while. Whereas when you're reading a self-help book, you are forced to think about your life and how the philosophy of this book will fit into it. And I don't want to be reading a book and thinking about any of the everyday stressors in my life. I want to read to get away from all of that stuff, to unwind and relax, not get anxious and stressed out. It's supposed to be a time in my day, like when you watch TV or you go on your phone or whatever, like I've talked about, that is just for pure entertainment. So taking in my hesitation, my cynicism, and my disgust for the mere existence of self-help books and self-help content that is out in the world right now into consideration, I actually tried to read a self-help book to help me out maybe with my mindset changes when it comes to New Year's resolutions. And the only reason that I picked the book that I picked is because it was the self-help book that I saw the most online, and that book is Atomic Habits by James Clear. The sole reason I decided to pick up this book was because it was the most popular self-help book recommended on the internet. I did not do any kind of research on self-help books. I knew of a couple others, but I just saw this one being recommended the most. I didn't read the summary. I didn't do anything other than read the literal title of this book and was like, yeah, I might as well try it. And that is exactly what I did. I tried it. I did not finish it. I got about a third of the way through. And part of that was because it kind of felt like information overload. It started out nice and easy with like a very clear background and a very clear concept, and then it started getting into like all of these steps that you need in order to build good habits in your life. And it just became a lot of like, all right, I think I maybe need to take this one step at a time and just kind of go with, you know, the information that I've already been given, and then move on to this next step once I've established that this is something that is realistic for me. I will say, I think I am going to try some of the tactics in this book that the author mentions, because it's actually some pretty good advice that I'm going to get into sharing with you. But first, I am going to read the synopsis to give you some better clarity on what exactly this book is about, because I didn't have that, and I think it would be very helpful, and it'll actually make you more intrigued to want to read this book once you hear the synopsis. No matter your goals, Atomic Habits offers a proven framework for getting 1% better every day. James Clear, one of the world's leading experts on habit formation, reveals practical strategies that will teach you exactly how to master the tiny behaviors that lead to remarkable results. If you're having trouble changing your habits, the problem isn't you. The problem is your system. Bad habits repeat themselves not because you don't want to change, but because you have the wrong system for change. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. In Atomic Habits, you'll get a plan that can take you to new heights. Clear is known for his ability to distill complex topics into simple behaviors that can be readily applied to daily life and work. Here, he draws on ideas from biology, psychology, and neuroscience to create an easy-to-understand guide for making good habits inevitable and bad habits impossible. Along the way, readers will be inspired and entertained with true stories from Olympic gold medalists, award-winning artists, business leaders, life-saving physicians, and star comedians who have used the science of small habits to vault to the top of their fields. Atomic Habits will reshape the way you think about progress and give you the tools and techniques you need to transform your habits. Whether you are an athlete looking to win a championship, a leader hoping to optimize an organization, or an individual who wishes to quit smoking, lose weight, reduce stress, and achieve success that lasts. This is a pretty good representation for what I think the book is about without giving too much away. So I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into what that all means because, this is a self-help book. It's not like there's spoilers in here. It's not like there's anything that I'm trying to gatekeep from you. I will let you know what I have learned so far in this book, what I'm hoping to implement in my own life, and if it actually works or not. So let's start off with the author and a little bit of his background and how he sort of qualifies himself to be giving this advice. Now, like I said earlier, I don't love self-help books because the tone of the author is often condescending. And I was very nervous about that when I started reading about this author and his story, but he actually really surprised me. From page 1 of the introduction, we learn about the author and his story and the catalyst for all of this. His sophomore year of high school, he was hit in the face with a baseball bat, and he had a broken nose, multiple skull fractures, and 2 broken eye sockets as well. So he basically broke his entire face. He says all of this on the first page in the first chapter of this intro. He had memory loss, multiple seizures. He slipped into a coma. He never really says the words near-death experience out loud, but he talks about, the machines keeping him alive and how it was even hard for him to blow his nose and smell, and he had multiple facial fractures, and he kept having seizures, and he was basically in really, really terrible shape after this accident, and he couldn't return to baseball immediately, and he was depressed, and there's just a lot that he went through, and this was basically the catalyst to him learning about habits. And how he was in college, he basically completely turned his life around and became successful using the framework that he is going to teach us in this book. Now, normally this would really bother me. Like I said, it's a little bit condescending. Like I was at my lowest and then I rose to the top using these steps that I'm going to teach you right now. So if you're like me, you're just going to automatically get better after this. But he doesn't talk like that in this introduction, which really surprised me in a pleasant way. He's very humble and doesn't really come off as condescending, which is very refreshing. He credits a lot of the advice in here to science, and there's actually a quote on page 9 that encapsulates his attitude towards this book perfectly. He says, "Anything wise in these pages you should credit to the many experts who preceded me. Anything foolish, assume it is my error." So when he talks about this advice in this book, he's not saying that it's foolproof. He's not saying that it is completely 100% correct in everything that he's saying, which was honestly really refreshing and made me read on, because I was like, he's basically saying take it or leave it. He's not saying that you need to do this. This isn't the key to success, but it will improve your life. Based off of the other things that a lot of people have said before me, which I thought was really cool. And I think more self-help books should be doing that, to be honest. He talks about how the book is just basically based around good, effective habits, and that habits compound, and that you get 1% better or 1% worse each day based on the habits that you practice. Now, something that started to worry me at this point about this philosophy, ideology, concept, whatever you want to call it, is that it lacks motivation in the short term. I am very much the type of person who likes to see progress right away. If I don't, I think to myself, oh, it's not working, and I just give up. This also sort of goes hand in hand with kind of like micromanaging your life, right? You want to get 1% better each day, so every single thing that you do throughout the day matters if you want to become a better person. And if I don't see the effects of that very quickly, then I'm going to be like, what the hell am I overthinking every decision I ever make for? Why would I want to do something like this if I'm not seeing the results, the positive results of this in the short term? Now, this gets to the part of the book where I kind of feel like the author read my mind a little bit. He talks about how we view progress and what it is actually like. I'm going to read you an excerpt of the book where he gives an example of an ice cube. Imagine that you have an ice cube sitting on the table in front of you. The room is cold and you can see your breath. It is currently 25 degrees. Ever so slowly, the room begins to heat up. 26 degrees, 27, 28. The ice cube is still sitting on the table in front of you. 29 degrees, 30, 31. Still, nothing has happened. Then, 32 degrees. The ice begins to melt. A 1-degree shift, seemingly no different from the temperature increases before it, has unlocked a huge change. Breakthrough moments are often the result of many previous actions which build up the potential required to unleash a major change. Similarly, habits often appear to make no difference until you cross a critical threshold and unlock a new level of performance. In the early and middle stages of any quest, there is often a valley of disappointment. You expect to make progress in a linear fashion, and it's frustrating how ineffective changes can seem during the first few days, weeks, and even months. It doesn't feel like you are going anywhere. It's a hallmark of any compounding process. The most powerful outcomes are delayed. This is one of the core reasons why it is so hard to build habits that last. People make a few small changes, fail to see tangible results, and decide to stop. You think, I've been running every day for a month, so why can't I see any change in my body? Once this kind of thinking takes over, it's easy to let good habits fall by the wayside. But in order to make a meaningful difference, habits need to persist long enough to break through this plateau, what I call the plateau of latent potential. If you find yourself struggling to build a good habit or break a bad one, it is not because you have lost your ability to improve. It is often because you have not yet crossed the plateau of latent potential. Complaining about not achieving success despite working hard is like complaining about an ice cube not melting when you heated it from just 25 to 31 degrees. Your work was not wasted. It is just being stored. All the action happens at 32 degrees. When you finally break through the plateau of latent potential, people will call it an overnight success. The outside world only sees the most dramatic event rather than all that preceded it. But you know that it's the work you did long ago, when it seemed that you weren't making any progress, that makes the jump today possible. This completely changed my outlook on not only progress, but success. I mean, I think it's so interesting when he says that people call it an overnight success. Like a great example is with actors, right? Like if they get a big role in something, it's all of a sudden, oh, like they just did one audition, like they had it so easy. It's like, no, you don't know how many auditions they've been going on. They've probably been going on hundreds. And all of those moments and all of that work that was put in is the reason that they got the big role. It didn't just happen on a fluke. And I think this concept that he talks about of the plateau of latent potential, I think it's less about trust and faith in a process, because that's kind of going in blind. Basically what I talked about in last week's episode of Daisy Jones and the Six, like faith is kind of going in blind on something. When it comes to this process and applying it to your own life, it's not about faith. It's about, proven systems that have worked, that will work for you if you follow along the simple steps. If you make the small habit changes, you're eventually going to get there. So it's not a matter of trust or faith. It's just a matter of taking the action and taking that first step, which I also thought was really interesting. To sum this up, he says a quote just on the next page that says, "All big things come from small beginnings." Now, I think a lot of what he's said in this book so far really surprised me because it is the complete opposite of everything that I thought a self-help book would say. Whereas what he says next is something that didn't even cross my mind. And he talks about forgetting about goals and focusing on systems instead. I was a little bit curious to see where he was going with this. And he talks about how normally when we talk about success and the prospect of success, the only way to get there is to set, as he says, specific and actionable goals. Now, at this point, I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with setting achievable goals? And he talks about how in his own life, there's certain goals that he wanted to set for himself, but he failed at a lot of them. And he realizes that the results had very little to do with the goals he set and nearly everything to do with the systems he followed. That is paraphrasing in his own words. And this really interested me because I was like, what does he mean about systems? Like fall in love with the process rather than the end result or something like that? And essentially, that is what he means. And before he talks about systems and how they are intrinsically connected with the habits that we practice and how it's a better approach to success, he actually goes so far as to thoroughly list out 4 different problems with goal setting. And at this point, I'm thinking to myself, okay, here's where the arrogance comes out. Here's where you have to follow this philosophy and no others are effective because I'm better than everybody. This is where I thought that arrogance was going to come in. But he actually lays out these problems in a very logical and practical way that make you think about like, oh, this is how my brain thinks about these things. And if I actually change my mindset to look at it in a different way, then I think that these habits are things that I can actually fold into my life effectively. So I'm going to read these problems to you and see if any of them strike a chord for you. So the first problem that he talks about is that winners and losers have the same goals. The first couple sentences of this section say, goal setting suffers from a serious case of survivorship bias. We concentrate on the people who end up winning, the survivors, and mistakenly assume that ambitious goals led to their success while overlooking all of the people who had the same objective but didn't succeed. Now, this is really interesting to me because I feel like a lot of the times we think about like, oh, you have a goal? Well, just go out there and do it. Go out there and make it happen. And not to like shit on Nike and their whole slogan, their whole deal and everything, but a lot of the times we don't know where to start in order to achieve that goal. And if I'm approaching something one way and I reach my goal and somebody else approaches it a completely different way and doesn't achieve their goal, we both went out and did it, but there were different outcomes. And I think that really starts to tie in this concept of a system and like the process of achieving a goal and how focusing on that is actually more effective than just having a goal and not knowing where to start, because everybody has to start somewhere. Now let's get into problem number 2 that he discusses, which is achieving a goal is only a momentary change. He starts by laying out the scenario of if you have a messy room, your goal is to clean it up. If you clean it up one day, that's a momentary change. If you still have the same habits that go into making your room dirty, then it's going to be this constant cycle of making your room dirty, cleaning it up, making it dirty, cleaning it up, and so on. If you have a better system in place with better habits and you keep your room in a constant state of cleanliness, then it's no longer a momentary change. It becomes a long-lasting result. A quote from this section, he says, "What we really need to change are the systems that cause those results. When you solve a problem at the results level, you only solve them temporarily. In order to improve for good, you need to solve problems at the systems level. Fix the inputs and the outputs will fix themselves." A way that I sort of interpret this in my mind is if you are given a maze and you have to draw from point A to point B, and let's say you go right and you hit a roadblock. In order to get to the end, you can't go right anymore because you hit the roadblock. You have to go left in order to get farther to your goal, to the end. You have to change your approach to the goal. That's the only way that we as humans are ever going to grow. And I thought that was a really interesting thing that he brought up because it is common. I feel like there are so many movies, and I can't think of specific examples right now, but when you see the main character finally achieve the goal that they set out to achieve the entire film, whether it's winning the team championship or becoming a pop star or whatever, and sometimes they look around and they're like, what now? Because it was that momentary point of success and they don't really know where to go from there. And I think that ties back to this problem of you don't really have the habits in place to maintain that state of success and make that permanent. Rather than just achieving a goal, it's creating these systems that help you improve over the long term. Now, this next problem that he points out feels kind of obvious, but at the same time, you don't really believe it until you achieve a goal. And that problem is goals restrict your happiness. The first thing he says in this section is the implicit assumption behind any goal is this: once I reach my goal, then I'll be happy. The problem with a goals first mentality is that you're continually putting happiness off until the next milestone. I think this problem in particular really hits home for people whose goals have to do with their weight, their body, getting in shape, etc. I mean, just speaking from the perspective of a woman and seeing how women are portrayed in the media, it makes you feel like, okay, if you are not a size 0, if you don't look like this, then you need to have a goal of getting to a size 0 and looking absolutely perfect with no flaws whatsoever. And it kind of instills that goal in your mind before you even know what you look like. So many girls go through this starting from such a young age when your body is still meant to be growing. And you get this idea in your head that you're not allowed to be happy, you're not allowed to enjoy yourself until you look a certain way. And if you go to drastic, unsustainable measures to achieve this goal, once you finally get there, you're not going to be happy like you thought you were. You're going to be absolutely miserable. You're going to find new things to pick apart, and you're going to look back and think, why did I completely torture myself to get here if it wasn't going to bring me the happiness that I wanted? And that goes with any goal that you may have, whether it is something to do with your body or it's starting a business or getting an education or whatever it may be. That momentary milestone, that momentary success that you get, it's not going to last. And this actually brings me into problem number 4, which is that goals are at odds with long-term progress. In his first couple sentences, he mentions that a goal-oriented mindset can create a yo-yo effect. He says many runners work hard for months, but as soon as they cross the finish line, they stop training. The race is no longer there to motivate them. When all of your hard work is focused on a particular goal, what is left to push you forward after you achieve it? This quote, I think, speaks for itself, and I think it's a great representation of why goal setting is not effective, because it talks a lot about the before and after achieving a goal rather than acknowledging that you are constantly a work in progress and that your goals aren't the only markers of your success, but it's actually the systems and the habits that you practice on a daily basis that measure how successful you truly are. So at this point, I'm like, all right, dude, you've convinced me. What do I do now? What is this system of atomic habits that I have to set up? How do I break bad habits and create good habits? And he goes in immediately to talking about why atomic habits, as he calls them, are so important and how they really lead to long-term progress and long-term success. So he actually has a section in this book called The Science of How Habits Work, and he breaks them up into 4 different steps: cue, craving, response, and reward. These are all things that make up a habit in that order. So he talks about different ways throughout the book on how to manipulate each of those steps, and he turns them into laws. So the first law is with Q, and it's to make it obvious. The second law is craving, to make it attractive. The third law is response, make it easy. And the fourth law is reward, make it satisfying. And in turn, to break a bad habit, it is the opposite. So the first law is the inversion of a Q, make it invisible. The second law is inversion of craving, make it unattractive. The third law is inversion of response, make it difficult. And inversion of the fourth law is to make it reward. So this was all very interesting to me, but when I started reading about the first law is when it kind of started to lose me a little bit. Not because it's bad, but because it's very specific, and it is very hard to keep me engaged if there is not a storyline happening. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, Julia, what the hell? I wanted a full review. Why didn't you read the entire book? How could you possibly judge this book if you didn't read the entire thing? You suck, whatever. I don't care. I'm going to tell you why. I read books to be entertained. I am not much of a self-help girl. I like things that have a storyline, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And this is a self-help book. So by nature, it doesn't have that, and it doesn't have a character in it that you can relate to and that you can follow. It is more just solely for the purpose of improving your own life. And that is a goal that I definitely have. It's part of my, New Year's resolutions that I talked about in the beginning of this episode. But if I was truly to read this book cover to cover with the intention of implementing it into my own life, I think that there is so much critical information that I would miss, because all of those laws that I read to you are in essence what the book is about. Those are the last macro concepts that you get introduced to, because there's a big section for the first law, a big section for the second, the third, and the fourth. And within those big sections are little chapters that talk about tips and techniques and theories on how to implement each of those laws into the habits that you eventually implement into your life. So I feel like it's so much critical information that would honestly just confuse me. And if I was to put it into practice, it would be like, okay, I'm going to start building good habits using X, Y, and Z. Oh, wait, I forgot about that one technique that he talked about in the first law, or that other rule that he talked about in the third law. Oh, wait, I forgot about this. I forgot about that. And I feel like at that point, it would just get so overwhelming and so unrealistic, at least for me in my own life. And this is probably the first concept that I've seen from a self-help book or motivational advice on the internet that seems doable, manageable, and simple. And when I started reading into the first law section, it became very nuanced very quickly, which I love, but it's just not something that I can digest cover to cover in one setting and then feel confident about implementing into my life. But if you are the complete opposite of me and you love self-help books and you can devour them from cover to cover, I highly, highly, highly recommend this book. It has defied every bad expectation that I've had about self-help books, and I feel like it outlines framework to building a really healthy lifestyle that anybody can benefit from. It's not like anything rigid. It can be very flexible to fit your goals and your lifestyle. So I highly, highly recommend it if you are somebody who can read them quickly. For me, I am going to continue to read this book. Even though I haven't finished it, I'm not done with it. I'm going to continue reading it. And then I think I'm going to make an episode at the end of this year and see if I've actually implemented these laws into my life and if they've helped me improve or not. And I will be honest if not, because we always choose honesty on this podcast. But that is actually going to conclude my episode today. I am so incredibly grateful to those of you that are listening and to those of you that are enjoying. And as my favorite C.S. Lewis quote goes, "No book is really worth reading at the age of 10, which is not equally and often far more worth reading at the age of 50 and beyond." Thank you so much for listening, everybody. Tune in next week. Bye.